Hello Traceable Designers. Today we're making the long pleated side panels. We're making sizing adjustments. We're going to be extending the upper section to cover more of the curtain rod. We're also going to add width to the long side for wrapping around the side return. This valance can be created using just the side panels that meet in the center, or you can make a pleated panel connector to hang between the side panels. Before you begin, make sure that your valance fabric has a straight edge across the top for making your rod pocket. One of the best ways to do that is to position the design form long side against the factory edge. Then just check the top of the valance design form to make sure that that is straight. Now, since we are adding quite a bit of width, we will need to use a single fabric layer rather than a folded fabric section, and then we'll be reversing the design form to make the opposite side panel. So you'll use it the same way, just in the reverse position to make the left side panel. I'm making a 35-inch wide panel, so I'm measuring from the edge over and marking my fabric at 35 inches so I know where to position the design form for tracing. Side panels include a 4-inch section on top that is used to make a rod hanging pocket. The lining does fall below the rod hanging pocket section. So when you're doing your sizing, you want to make sure that you include that extra fabric on top. So I'm positioning my design form to make sure that the fabric is nice and straight across the top first, and then I'm moving the design form down and marking where the 4-inch marker would be for the rod pocket. Then you can size your fabric, making sure that you have the proper amount on top. So since I'm adding to the upper section and I'm also adding to the inside section, I'm going to begin by adding the 1-inch difference between the side edge and the position for the valance design form. So I'm marking all the way down my fabric section so I know where to position the left side. And then I also need to make sure that the design form is positioned where or below the 4-inch rod pocket section, so that's straight across the top. So I'm aligning it with the left side and then just simply marking across the top of the design form and then sliding it to the right all the way over to make sure that it goes to the 35-inch mark. Then you'll slide your design form over to the 1-inch mark for the additional width, or more if needed, and then aligned across the rod pocket section as well. So we're going to begin tracing on the under section, the lower part that curves down all the way to the bottom and around the bottom and over to the edge first. Once that's finished, I'm sliding my design form over to my 35-inch width mark, aligning across my rod pocket marks, tracing the underneath straight section, and then down the right side to mark the width cut line. Now I'm sliding the design form down to trace across the top edge to connect the width marks. To cut out your valance panel, start at the lower curved section, carefully curving around the corners, and then just continue following the line until you've cut out your valance panel up and across the rod pocket section. To size the lining, we want to make sure that the valance right side is facing the lining. The lining top edge is the top edge of the design form, so it's shorter than the valance panel itself because the valance panel includes the 4-inch rod pocket section. So I'm folding my valance across my marks so that I can iron that and crease it, and then I'm using that across the top edge of my lining. The lining will then be shorter than my valance panel. So this is a custom size, so I'm just giving myself a margin of about 2 inches around the entire fabric section. In case the lining shifts, you want to make sure that it is completely covered when you fuse these pieces together. So just follow the shape of your valance section or your valance fabric section, cutting a 2-inch margin across the entire panel, and then we'll use that section of lining to attach to our valance fabric. So as you can see, we have plenty of excess around the edges and our rod pocket is above the lining section. So now pull out your fusible seam tape. This is Heat and Bond Ultra Hold, and we'll be using that to attach the lining to the fabric. Make sure there's no steam on your iron, and we're attaching the seam tape to the front side of the valance below the rod pocket section. Your rod pocket section does not have lining, so you'll begin below that area. So you'll just take your seam tape and put it really close to the edge without overlapping onto your ironing board, and then just fuse that right down straight across the side. And then we're just going to follow the shape of our valance panel fabric using the seam tape around all edges. When you get to the lower curved section, you'll cut pieces, so just fuse that down and then tear, and continue overlapping the pieces of fusible seam tape, trying to form around the curve the best you can, making sure that the pieces are overlapping. Continue up the curved side and across the lower straight section. Make sure your pieces do overlap so you're completely covered. When you get to the opposite side, you want to make sure your tape stays below the rod pocket section, so you might want to just cut a piece off and then fuse that on. Now, if you do see a break in the tape, go ahead and cut little pieces and add those right on top to make sure you have full coverage. Once the seam tape has completely cooled, just carefully peel the strips off to expose the glue. If any paper is left behind, make sure to pick that off and make sure that all of the paper has been completely removed. Now, when you get around the corners and you have overlapping tape, just make sure you don't pull the glue off, so carefully remove those. To attach your lining, make sure it is aligned across the rod pocket section where the glue begins, and then make sure everything's nice and smooth and that the lining is covering the glue and extending past all edges. Make sure you check the bottom before you start ironing. Use the dry iron, no steam, and start in the center with a sweeping motion out toward the sides. Even though you're not attaching the lining anywhere except the outer edges along the seam tape, you want to make sure everything is nice and smooth so you avoid buckling. So begin in the center, sweeping out to the side, and then you can run your iron along the seam tape. Do not hold your iron in one place very long, or you can get iron marks. So you'll start to follow along the seam tape. Make sure that's nice and secured with a sweeping motion. You'll start to see the glue pop through. You can see where it has adhered to the lining from the valance section, and then just sweep along the center out all the way down to the bottom until the lining is completely secured. Once everything has completely cooled, just flip the panel over and follow along the shape of the valance, removing the excess lining. Since we will be turning this valance right side out, to make it easier, you need to snip the corners. So I'm making little V snips in the curved sections right at the upper top where the long side panel meets, and then also you want to do this along the section where the curve on the bottom begins. Make sure not to snip all the way through or you will have a hole in your valance. Then just snip the corners off before you start to turn your valance panel. Before turning your fabric, make sure the seam tape is 100% cooled, otherwise you can push through the seams and end up with holes. So just continue to manipulate the fabric, pushing your fingers into the corners to get everything nice and straight. Once everything is completely flattened out, you'll then use the iron to flatten the seams. You want to have a nice crisp shape, which will come into play as you continue to iron. And then when you get to the corner part, or the inside under corner from the long side to the top, you'll need to just pull the fabric a little bit, and then that will flatten right down. So as you can see, once everything's nice and flat, you have a beautiful fully lined panel with a contrasting lining on the back. Now we do need to secure this lining and the seams, so we're going to use the seam tape and insert it underneath the outer edges. Make sure it's completely hidden below the fold. You'll do that on both sides, and then we need to pull the lining up and secure that because we don't want sagging. You don't want to see the lining in the front, and over time, if it hangs without being secured, it can drop down from behind. Once you've removed all of the paper from the seam tape, just carefully pull the lining up and secure it to the seam tape along the seams on the outside edges and across the back. To make your side panel pleats, position the long side closest to you, and as a general rule, you want to leave about 2.5 inches of straight fabric on the outer edge to curve around your rod return. If your rod return is deeper, you might want to leave a little bit more space there, and then just plan to add some width to the long side to accommodate. So I'm measuring along to make sure it's even. You want to make sure these are perfectly straight up and down so that when you make your rod pocket, it's also straight. So I'm ironing that down to flatten it, and then we'll continue to pull pleats over. You can adjust the width. As a general rule, when this is finished, you should have about 9.5 to 11 inches of pleated area width. So I'm just measuring, making sure everything is even across. This is the most important part, and then just iron that down as you continue along. I'm making my pleats about 1.5 inches wide, roughly, Just as long as everything is balanced, you're just fine, and continue to iron that down because you will be securing those and you want those nice and flat. So the last pleat starts where the upper section begins. So you'll fold that over, get everything nice and straight. Take a look at it. If it looks good, that's great. Otherwise, you can open it up, re-iron it, and start again until you get the width that you're looking for. Mine is about 9.5 inches wide for the pleated area, and everything looks pretty straight. You also need to measure your full panel width, because if it's not wide enough, you need looser pleats, or if it's too wide, you can tighten those up. To secure our pleats, you'll pull out your Heat and Bond Ultra Hold fusible fabric backing, remove the plastic paper, and then just cut strips of backing to fit underneath your pleats. Those have to go all the way up across the rod pocket section, and then they have to be hidden completely behind each pleat without extending beyond, so you don't have glue exposed. If you do have to cut at an angle at the bottom on the first pleat, go ahead and do that so that it doesn't stick out. And then you can adjust your backing as you need to for the different sizes of the pleats. Once all your strips are in place, you'll be able to fuse those down. You want to make sure they come all the way up to the top of the rod pocket section. I like to anchor it with the iron on top at first so that they don't move, and then you can just put the iron under each pleat and fuse those down. Then once the paper has completely cooled, just peel it back to expose the glue. Make sure that you readjust each one of your pleats so that the glue is completely covered, and then you will iron those to flatten and put them in place. Now this does take a little while because you're going through a few layers of fabric, so you may want to get a piece of lining and put it over top. You don't want to burn your fabric, so you can press and keep the iron moving until those are completely secured, and then let them cool completely before you flip your panel over. To finish your pleats, you will be securing them on the back side. This is so that your rod will slip easily through the rod pocket without catching on the pleats. So you can cut shorter pleats. We just really need it to be from the very top edge down across the rod pocket section. And again, make sure they're hidden completely behind. If the glue is exposed, it will close your pocket and you won't be able to get your rod to slip through there. When fusing down your back pleats, you may need to use the piece of lining to avoid burning the back, but the most important thing is that it's completely sealed. So you just need to take your time pressing and moving the iron and make sure those are completely sealed, and you don't disturb the panel until everything is 100% cooled, because when you fold your rod pocket over, you want to make sure that everything is sealed. To make your rod pocket, fold the section over, making sure not to disturb the pleats, and just above, align it just above the lining. You don't want to overlap the lining, and iron to flatten that. Then cut a piece of fusible backing to fit inside of that folded section. You don't want to overlap onto the lining or onto your ironing board, and then just iron that across to deposit the glue. Then once you remove the paper, you can then pull the pocket over top of the lining to seal. So you'll fold that over and then take your time pressing and holding heat against the back of the pocket until that is completely sealed. Wait for it to fully cool before you insert the rod. Then just follow the same process with the design form reversed or upside down to make the left side panel, and you'll be ready to hang your beautiful new pleated valance. Make sure to like this video and click the subscribe button so you'll never miss a Traceable Designer how-to valance video.